our brain builds what I call habit highways. Thoughts that we repeat become faster. Decisions we make frequently become automated. And this is where it gets interesting. I start every episode with the same question. What does true longevity mean? Today, for me, it means the willingness to think differently at 45 than at 30. And I'll tell you right now why that's relevant. If you really implement what we're talking about today, you will make clearer decisions, sleep more soundly, react less impulsively, act more strategically in business, and feel less mentally overwhelmed. Not because you're working harder, but because you're restructuring your system. Because growth isn't automatic, it's a conscious decision. And if we're honest, why is this so difficult for us anyway? Why do we walk the same beaten paths, even though we know they no longer serve us? The answer isn't a lack of discipline, it lies within our brain. Our brain builds what I call habit highways. Thoughts that we repeat become faster. Decisions we make frequently become automated. And this is where it gets interesting. It's not just about thoughts, it's about identity. At 30, you define yourself by speed. At 45, structure is what decides. At 30, you might say, I can handle this. At 45, you ask, what sustains me long term? And this is where the 3 pillars of the longevity framework come in. The health pillar. Let's start with that. Because frankly, this is where I see the biggest illusions. At 30, a lot still works on reserve. At 45, the system starts to take stock. I work with entrepreneurs who say, I've always worked this way. Yes, that may be true, but your body is no longer the same. And suddenly, it reacts. And I see this pattern not just in health, but also in wealth. At 30, you might believe more effort, more success. And often, that's true. But at 45, I see entrepreneurs with revenue, but no strategic peace. And then it becomes clear. Wealth isn't created through intensity, it's created through architecture. And I see it with entrepreneurs time and again. Those who are willing to adapt their thinking and decision architecture have measurably lower chronic tension after 6 to 12 months. Fewer crisis decisions, more stable cash flow, and more strategic peace. Not because the market gets quieter, but because they become calmer. And then there's a third dimension that we very often underestimate. And in the age of artificial intelligence, it's crucial. Digital constant presence. I see people who want clarity, but their day consists of interruptions. At 30, you compensate for sensory overload. At 45, you simply pay the price for it. Not emotionally, but cognitively. When you treat sleep strategically, the following happens. Your cortisol rhythm normalizes, your HRV increases, your regeneration simply becomes deeper. And suddenly, you need less willpower. So, if you rethink your wealth structure, you reduce liquidity stress, you gain decision-making leeway, and you act less out of pressure. And pressure is biologically very expensive. If you reduce your digital presence, decision fatigue also decreases, focus increases, and cognitive fragmentation decreases. And these aren't esoteric effects, it's simply systemic. And maybe that is the actual core. At 30, you think in possibilities. At 45, you start thinking in decades. Longevity means not reacting short-term, but shaping things long-term. And here it gets very concrete. Many people change their goals, but they don't change their decision-making mechanics. You want freedom, but you continue to decide based on pressure. You want stability, but you continue to react impulsively. And that's exactly why new pathways are needed. So, how does a new pathway emerge now? Not through motivation, but through repetition. Not through euphoria, but through structure. If you're ready to change a health pattern, incorporate a financial structural principle, and eliminate a digital tool, you'll notice within 30 to 60 days that you react differently. Not perfectly, but more consciously. And awareness is ultimately the beginning of structure. At the beginning, I said if you think differently than at 30, you'll become clearer, more stable, and more structured. And why? Because at 45, your system no longer rewards intensity. It rewards architecture. At 30, you can compensate for pace. At 45, you win through structure. You can't build a new life on old pathways. And if you implement that consistently, it specifically means Less chronic stress, better decisions, more stable energy, more strategic wealth development, and more mental sovereignty. And that is true longevity. Biologically regenerative, economically structured, and digitally sovereign. Health, wealth, privacy, AI. That is longevity to go. Stay tuned for more.